Secret Service did not give clear guidance or direction to our local law enforcement partners. There were communication deficiencies between law enforcement personnel at the site. For example, the Secret Service did not co-locate its security room with local law enforcement. There was an over-reliance on mobile devices, resulting in information being siloed.
Breaking now, United States Secret Service Director Ronald Rowe Jr. announcing the findings of an investigation into July's assassination attempt against former President Trump. It comes after the House voted Friday morning to increase Trump's security following 2 separate assassination attempts on his life within the last 60 days. The legislation, titled the Enhanced Presidential Security Act, cleared in a 405-0 vote. The bill now makes its way to the Senate, where it's unclear if the upper chamber will consider the measure. Florida Senator Rick Scott has also proposed similar legislation. The vote Friday marks the latest step by the House as Congress continues to debate additional funding for the Secret Service following the assassination attempts. Meantime, a flurry of new polls were released this week, giving us some insight into the state of play in the battleground states. While Kamala Harris is leading in more battlegrounds than Trump, polling shows the gaps between the 2 candidates are closing. To break it all down, we're joined by The Hill's national politics reporter and author of the 1230 report, Cate Martel. Cate, it's always great to see you. Looking at all of these polls, and there's a number of them, there's national polls, there's state levels, and all of the battlegrounds. Harris may be slightly ahead, but Trump is very much still in this race. The margins are razor thin in some swing states, and many of these polls were conducted before the second assassination attempt on Trump. What are your takeaways?
Well, Julia, my biggest takeaway is, as any pollster or political operative will tell you, you don't look at any individual poll. You just take broad trends and you can find little bits of what's going on in American politics. Now, that being said, like you mentioned, it's, Vice President Harris is leading in a number of these polls. That you'd probably rather be Harris than Trump at this point, but only by the slightest margin. Actually, election forecaster Nate Silver actually released a prediction where he said this is as close as his models have ever been in the 16 years he's been doing this. So while for Vice President Harris, she is polling better. We are in a bit of a weird campaign season. It's a bit more condensed than usual. We've only had Harris as the top of the ticket for the past 2 months. So that kind of throws things up in the air. So as far as we're considering it, it's a bit of a coin flip. It could go in either direction, and there's still, with less than 50 days out, so many different factors that can still change the race. There's been millions of dollars poured into campaign ads. That can still have a major effect, as well as former President Trump's supporters have been hard to poll. They always have been, and they've been, that can definitely have an effect. And also the fact that Vice President Harris is the first female potential President of the United States, and that's the first presidential election after the Supreme Court reversed Roe versus Wade in 2022. That can also have a major effect.
Yeah, and our sources on the Democratic side of things tell us that they are pushing Harris, and the Harris campaign is doing this to run like she is losing. Some good advice there. So I want to move towards today. Vice President Harris is set to hold her first rally in Madison, Wisconsin since kicking off her campaign. It comes just a day after she sat down with Oprah Winfrey, where she discussed several hot button issues. But what grabbed the attention of many viewers and readers in the coverage the day after were her comments when she was asked about being a gun owner. Take a listen.
You said you have guns. No, at the debate. At the debate,
I'm a gun owner. Tim Walz is a gun.
I did not know that.
If somebody breaks in my house, they're getting shot.
Do you think Harris's comments, Cate, about being a gun owner will have any impact with voters, particularly on the issue of the Second Amendment?
I actually do think that this could have a major effect, Julia, because that type of comment, Harris is speaking to centrist voters and centrist voters only. She's not talking to the progressive wing of the party, and she's giving herself street cred for, understanding that people who are gun owners are not necessarily the enemy, which I think a lot of people on the right believe that the left actually feels. And by her speaking about being a gun owner herself, I think does give credibility to when she and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz talk about gun policy that they would potentially implement if she's elected president in the next administration. This is a fascinating, comment that she made. I think it grabbed a lot of headlines, and it was not a comment that I was necessarily expecting to hear Harris make in such a forum like this, but I think it was incredibly politically savvy for her to speak to these centrist voters, specifically at a forum with Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey is incredibly popular among women, particularly suburban women, and that happens to be a huge demographic that the Harris campaign is trying to court. So to come out and have in this style of forum with Oprah Winfrey, who's incredibly popular and a master interviewer, to then make this type of comment appears off the cuff, but it was, I think, politically savvy and trying to speak to centrist voters, particularly these battleground states who could very likely end up deciding the election in either direction.
Well, and it's interesting because a number of other Democrats running further down the ballot in red districts and red states have also talked about being gun owners. So it seems that she might be taking a page out of that playbook. We'll see how it plays. Want to shift gears to North Carolina. Quite a bit of breaking news out of that battleground state. The state's gubernatorial race made headlines late this week after CNN reported that Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson made a series of racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic comments on an adult website years ago. Now, Robinson denied these claims in a post on X. Let's take a listen.
Let me reassure you, the things that you will see in that story, those are not the words of Mark Robinson. We are staying in this race. We are in it to win it.
Cate, what's the reaction been to these allegations? I know that there are more moderate Republicans who have really tried to distance themselves from Mark Robinson even before these allegations and the story came out. But what are Republicans saying today?
Yeah, distancing themselves is the key phrase here. That, Mark Robinson is categorically denying these allegations that these types of comments are, so offensive that Republicans are beginning to distance themselves. And, there had been broad speculation yesterday of whether Mark Robinson would drop out of the race when the CNN report came out. He did not. We reached the midnight deadline last night. That was the deadline for him to drop out. So now it appears he will be continuing to be at the top of the ballot. And, it is putting Republicans in a fairly uncomfortable spot. We haven't seen, many Republicans try to go as far to call for him to step out of the race, but they're very much trying to distance themselves and trying to make a difference between, what's happening in the election versus what happened in this report, to try to keep them distanced because he will be at the top of the ballot and there aren't many backup options for them, Julia.
Well, and on that note of distancing themselves, we know that former President Trump will no longer, Mark Robinson will no longer appear at a rally with former President Trump that Trump is holding in North Carolina this weekend. We know that Trump and down ballot Republicans in North Carolina have appeared with Robinson this cycle. But could their ties to Robinson threaten to bring down the GOP ticket in North Carolina? I noticed there was some backlash to one North Carolina Republican House candidate who deleted a picture on X of her and Robinson, and then Democrats calling out that candidate. How do Republicans react to this?
Well, I will say that Democrats definitely think that they can seize on this headline. We saw the Harris campaign immediately start comparing quotes that we saw from Robinson and trying to equate them to other Republican candidates. What's fascinating about this is that North Carolina is very much a battleground state. It's certainly not going to help Republicans. That is why Republicans at this point are trying to keep their distance from Robinson and particularly from these comments in the CNN report. It's unclear how much that will play out, particularly for former President Trump, because he is obviously much more well known than Mark Robinson is, even in North Carolina, that I doubt it would potentially take away votes from former President Trump. But where it can pick away votes are moderate centrist voters. These are the few, like we discussed earlier, will very likely end up determining these battleground states and their outcomes. And you want your side of the ticket to be strong at every level. So it's certainly not going to help former President Trump. It's questionable whether it will hurt Trump, and it can certainly hurt other Republicans depending on what their reaction is over the coming weeks.
So I want to move over to Ohio, and the fallout is continuing after a series of false claims from former President Trump's campaign and President Trump himself that Haitian migrants are eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. The city has received at least 30 bomb threats since the debate last week when he made those claims. And Republican Congressman Mike Turner, who represents the city in Congress, said the comments are tearing the community apart. And now Ohio Governor Mike DeWine is out with a new op-ed calling out the baseless claims. Cate, what is Mike DeWine saying?
Yeah, Mike DeWine is in a tough spot. He's a supporter of former President Trump, but he's seen what's happened in Springfield, Ohio over the past week and is troubled by this. He, like you said, published an op-ed in the New York Times where he said he was really saddened by these remarks and talked about the rich history that Springfield, Ohio has, and said that he was disappointed that former President Trump and his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, were talking about these allegations that he said were baseless and lack evidence. We're overall seeing, what's happening in Springfield, Ohio has really struck a nerve with the community. And for Governor DeWine to write an op-ed like this so close to the election really, I think, shows how important this is and how much this struck a nerve, particularly in Ohio, when people are seeing these bomb threats and all of the safety issues that have come with a single comment from a presidential debate.
Yeah, we know that DeWine is very conservative and has supported President Trump, but he's always walked this tightrope with him. But like you said, Cate, that op-ed really seems to be signaling a potential turning point there. We'll see what happens next. So I want to move back home here for us to Capitol Hill. Republicans in the House are shifting strategies as time is running out to avoid a government shutdown. Speaker Mike Johnson is expected to introduce a 3-month stopgap bill instead of the 6-month bill. But without the provision for tougher voting rules, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has also said the Senate would introduce its own plan to avoid a shutdown, but the deadline is quickly approaching. Cate, can lawmakers get a deal done in time?
Julia, how many times have you and I had this conversation over the years of we're nearing a shutdown deadline? Can lawmakers get this done in time? And most of the time, yes, they can. But that being said, while the deadline is September 30th, that is actually not that far away because you start factoring in weekends that they are not going to be in session this weekend and there are not that many days left to be able to fund the government. But let's face it, the politics of a shutdown are horrendous. And, because Speaker Mike Johnson has been taking the lead, he would inevitably end up with the blame. And that's not something that Republicans want so close to Election Day. So, the chances of they don't want a shutdown and the chances of them happening, I think, are still fairly low. That being said, if they don't move quickly, they could end up in a spot where there is a lapse in government funding just because of the way that congressional procedure works. That being said, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer already has his backup plan in place. Usually these government funding provisions start in the House, they're passed in the House, then they move their way to the Senate and get passed there, then make it to the president's desk. So it's a bit unconventional that Chuck Schumer is basically saying, you know what, I'm going to have my backup plan in place because I know how Senate procedure works. And he is planning on this 3-month government funding provision. Republicans had unsuccessfully wanted to fund the government for 6 months, hoping that they could take back control of the Senate and the White House and continue to control the House, and they could have a lot more provisions passed. That provision did not make it successfully through the House. It failed rather stunningly and predictably a few days ago. And now they're back to the drawing board, and Speaker Mike Johnson has, I would argue, conceded that the only way to pass this government funding bill is just to make it for 3 months, just to get us till the end of the year. And we can have this discussion again in December on how to avert another government shutdown when we're looking at potentially a lame duck session.
I was talking to a member of our congressional team. They essentially said, look, this comes down to Republicans in the House once again being divided and Chuck Schumer getting his ducks in a row, to put it quite simply. So, Cate, before we let you go, there's a couple of other interesting headlines and tidbits in your 1230 report. What do you have for us?
Yeah, so we have a section in the Hills 1230 report of internet buzz, and we track internet trends, lighter stories, kind of behind the scenes tidbits. And there's a few that kind of caught my eye today. The first is that the former First Lady Michelle Obama was spotted at Costco. She is promoting a new drink, and some people saw her. There's a viral TikTok video of her in Costco talking about her new drink and allowing people to sample it. Another lighter kind of funny story is that there is a zoo in China that advertises they have pandas. Well, they have admitted that these pandas are actually painted dogs. So if you go check out the newsletter, there are photos. The photos are very, very funny.
Do you remember, there was that, I guess, the question over what are they called, the sun bears in China? They thought they were people in bear costumes, but I guess that's what sun bears sort of look like. I don't know. That story reminded me of that. So sort of
I immediately Googling that.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Cate Martel, thank you so much for joining us. And for you all watching, please subscribe to Cate's 1230 report. It comes right into your inbox at 1230 on the dot, Monday through Friday. I highly recommend it to keep up to date with what's happening in politics and really around the world. Cate, thank you so much.
Thanks, Julia. This is always so fun.
Make sure that both the people in northern Israel as well as southern Lebanon are able to go back to their homes and go back safely. And the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, our whole team is working in the intelligence community to try to get that done. We're going to keep at it till we get it done.
That was President Biden during his first cabinet meeting in a year after Israel carried out dozens of strikes in Beirut on Friday. The latest targeted strikes come days after communication devices exploded across Lebanon, killing at least 37 people, including a 9-year-old girl and an 11-year-old boy, and injuring thousands of others. Israel and Hezbollah have exchanged fires as tensions have increased, despite the White House warning against an escalation of any kind. The level of destruction and number of casualties from the strikes in Lebanon are unclear, with the latest numbers reporting 3 killed and 17 injured. As rescue workers say, they are carrying out searches to locate individuals under the rubble of buildings. Doctors report hospitals are overflowing in recent days, describing lost eyes and amputated limbs as common injuries. Multiple U.S. officials have said that Israel is behind the device explosions, with authorities worried the conflict could spark an all-out war. A federal judge has agreed to delay Hunter Biden's first criminal sentencing on felony gun charges by 3 weeks, now scheduling it for December 4th. Biden's lawyers asked for sentencing to be pushed back from the original date of November 13th, with conflicts with Biden's other ongoing legal battles. A Delaware jury convicted Biden on 3 felony gun charges in June. Biden was also set to face a second criminal trial in California on 9 tax-related charges. He avoided that trial by pleading guilty. His sentencing for those charges is scheduled for December 16th. And as the presidential election closes in, the economy continues to be the top campaign topic for Vice President Harris and for former President Trump. But housing is also becoming a key issue for voters. Both campaigns are talking about the high cost of housing and promising to bring it down. In today's News Nation Political Minute, Chief Washington correspondent Blake Berman takes a closer look at the trends driving up housing costs in this country.
The election hitting close to home. I'm Blake Berman with News Nation. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are promising to fix the high cost of housing.
We are going to cut red tape and work with the private sector to build 3 million new homes by the end of my first term.
I have been a builder my entire life. I understand the problem, and I will fix it. I know how to fix it. Nobody else is going to figure it out.
Now, all across the country, polls show the cost of housing ranks high among top issues for voters. And home prices are up 29% since 2020. Mortgages right now just north of 6%, though they've dropped from their peak last October. Renters are feeling the pinch as well. Across the country, rents up 5% over the past year. And both candidates are hoping to convince voters that they'll be the one to bring some relief. I'm Blake Berman, and this is the News Nation Political Minute.
And thank you to my friend Blake Berman there. You can find more news and analysis from Blake and our partners at News Nation. To find News Nation on your screen, go to joinnn.com. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Julia Manchester. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.